Here we see the chart for tomorrow night's debate in Atlanta at 9 p.m. Eastern. And the important planets to focus on are the Pisces planets over here, Saturn, Moon, and Neptune, as well as the Cancer planets, Sun, Venus, and Mercury. And then you can also look at what Mars, Uranus, Jupiter, and Pluto are doing in terms of the overall pattern here, as well as to the individual charts of Trump and Biden. We first look at Biden. We see that here with the ephemeris showing the macro look at the situation, meaning though the debate is being held here on the 27th, these two stations, the Saturn and Neptune stations that happen at the end of June, early July, 19.5 Pisces for Saturn, right at the very end of Pisces for Neptune. These are stations that affect all of the events happening around this period, meaning from mid-June into mid-July, these two planets are crucial. When you see what they're doing in Biden's chart, you see that Neptune is actually very favorable. It's at the end of Pisces, trining his Venus Sun. That can only be considered good. The Saturn is also pretty good in the sense of it also doing a trine in the general direction of his Mercury, a little before the exact degrees, but nevertheless good in that sense. However, it is very close to the MC-IC angle, although this is heavily dependent on the accuracy of his birth time, and there is reason to believe it's possible that he was born a little earlier. Either way, though, this Saturn is close enough to this angle to cause potential problems, which I think have been related of late to the relentless attempt to paint him as a doddering old man. This is typical Saturn problematic energy. And yet, at the same time, as we get close to the debate, we notice that the GOP and all the media allies are suddenly apparently worried about what might happen. And where before the attitude seemed to be Joe cannot do anything straight, he's constantly out of touch with reality, suddenly they're thinking he might be a great debater and that things may not turn out as well for Trump as they initially expected. So overall, Saturn not quite as good as Neptune here, but nevertheless pretty good in making trines in this direction, especially the Neptune. The moon in Pisces at that time, 25 degrees, is very good because it casts a trine in the direction of Scorpio between his Mercury Sun and directly to his Jupiter over here. So all of that is very, very good. Then if we look at the Cancer planets, first of all, Cancer is good in the sense of trining his Scorpio planets automatically. Even though not exactly, Mercury certainly is to itself. That can only mean ease of communication. In that sense, it's going to help him to have Mercury in that spot. The Venus Sun are not connected to any of the degrees, but being in that sign is helpful. Then, if we look at the Uranus energy, it's not quite yet at the opposition to the Sun. That'll come later in August. And so I don't consider this planet quite yet active enough to be a problem for him. Indeed, where it is, it's much closer to sextiling Jupiter. So that's a good position. Jupiter is not making an exact connection to the Saturn yet, but it's sextiling Pluto. That's another good position for him. And then when we look at Mars, this is where the people that have been saying they're hoping he brings out his Scorpio sting are going to be rewarded because Mars is opposing his Mars at the time of the debate. It is 1 degree past. You see it there, 13.5 to his 12.5 Mars. But if you do a precessional correction, or if you argue from the perspective of planetary orbs, it's well within the region. So there is strong Mars energy there in opposition, meaning that in the lead up to tomorrow, including today, the day before, I'm sure Joe has been quite edgy and itching for a fight. Hopefully he won't be too aggressive, but I don't think he's going to lack in the aggression department with Mars opposing his Mars at the time of the debate. Now, if we look at the chart for the other guy, we see that these stations here are not nearly as helpful to him, in that Neptune at the very end of Pisces is directly inconjunct quincunx, the ascendant. And this, I believe, is the primary reason we've seen such a precipitous health decline, in the sense that quite frequently during the last month, 2 months, he descends into gibberish and disconnected communication, to the point lots and lots of people are speculating on his dementia, etc. Whether or not you believe that, an angle like this is always maladjusted and doesn't work properly in the context of what he's trying to achieve at this time in his life. Neither is Saturn helpful, because the Saturn station at 19 is way too close to his sun and moon to feel comfortable, particularly from the 8th sign, and it's already operating in a direct square to that Uranus, which it found earlier in the year, and essentially right now it's stationing at minimum right inside the midpoint of Sun Uranus or Moon Uranus. So this is not helpful at all from the macro level of looking at the region of time. But then if you move in to look at the day planets, meaning what these planets are doing together with the moon, as well as the sun, Venus, Mercury, that also doesn't give you a lot of room for optimism, because the moon in Pisces at 25 degrees, yes, it is trining the Venus from there, but it's also highlighting his 12th sign in doing that. And moreover, this guy's nature, being very strongly Jupiterian through hyperbole, exaggeration, and especially overconfidence. These are the problems with Jupiter when it's not working well. You see the shadow of the planet. A planet that essentially rules expansion will show you the problems with expansion when it's not working well. So the moon trining into the 12th sign can lead, in his case, my belief is, to overconfidence, because a trine is that way. Venus is a place where you feel comfortable. His problem is that the 12th house, where these planets are, is never a comfortable place, particularly when, for example, your opponent can say, hey, you're a convicted felon. That's 12th house energy. That's someone calling you on your previous crimes, as well as all his lies, which arise out of that house, etc. Not really great in that sense. But if you want to be charitable, you would say, okay, well, at least the moon is trine. He's getting that assistance going into the 12th sign. The Cancer planets in the 12th, in a way, the same argument. They're highlighting the energies in that house. The sun at 6 degrees is thereby triggering Eris and Neptune and Mercury, the infamous axis Hollywood T-square. Sun square Eris, he's going to be combative. What else is new? And this is, in my opinion, more likely to lead to a problem than to any kind of advantage in the case of Trump, given that it's going through the axis Hollywood T-square, an area that he is never comfortable with when planets visit. And then the Mercury position, though not quite yet at the place of his Saturn, is essentially going there next. It's fairly close, not quite there yet. But bottom line, on the day positions, I would consider this Cancer energy not particularly helpful given the house that we're talking about. Had they been up here in Gemini, that would have been much, much better. Meanwhile, if you look at the Uranus position, it's set up for a major potential problem around his erratic responses, as well as his ultra-rebellious, I'll do whatever I want type of energy, and therefore potentially things coming out of his mouth that become problematic. That is due to its proximity to the MC as it approaches the Mars position of the chart. It's way too close for comfort. Of course, it'll be worse later in the convention when Mars reaches this Uranus by degree, and then at the same time they square Mars. But nevertheless, this is not safe at all where the Uranus is. And then Jupiter, yes, it's in his sign, but you notice it's approaching the semi-square to Saturn and then to Venus, which comes after the debate. And this is another pattern that you see here that tells you that it's likely to be a bad outcome for this guy, because Jupiter, right after the debate, goes into a semi-square to the Venus-Saturn, and Mercury goes over the Saturn. Neither of those are good. The sun moves in the next 3-4 days through the axis Hollywood T. That's no good either. And then the moon overnight leaves Pisces and enters the axis Hollywood T. So this panorama doesn't look good to me at all in terms of having a successful debate. So bottom line, I call it for Biden in terms of how it'll turn out, even if, of course, the right-wing media, that whole apparatus, is going to try to come up with every potential excuse. And don't be surprised if Trump, after the debate, quickly announces his VP pick, because one of Trump's techniques, where you have to admit he's quite good, is he always wants to shift the message if the message is not favorable to him. Therefore, my feeling is he is likely to announce his VP pick immediately or very soon after the debate to shift the narrative. In contrast, if he did well, he would then be advised to wait longer, keep people in suspense, because that way he would get more mileage out of it. But I'm betting that it's going to go much sooner as a result of the fact that his performance is unlikely to match Biden's. Final thing I'll say, which is very interesting, is when you look at the chart for the time of the debate, Capricorn is rising. Now, notice that these degrees of Capricorn, they are right at the beginning, directly opposite, or almost directly opposite, is Mercury. But more problematically, Capricorn is a sign he doesn't like because planets through here, or anything through here, triggers the axis Hollywood T-square, and in the late part of the sign opposes his Saturn-Venus. It turns out that the debate happens between the 10th degree and the very beginning of Aquarius. By the time it's ending, the last, I believe, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it enters Aquarius and gets a little past this Pluto. The problem for him is that it starts at the end of the axis Hollywood T, moves toward his Saturn-Venus opposition in here, and then when it ends in early Aquarius, that's not great either, because early Aquarius, in fact, I didn't bring this up, where Pluto is in early Aquarius, there's a sesquiquadrate to his Uranus. So it's not easy territory for him either. So the debate ends in a spot that isn't favorable, and begins there and ends there as well, ends in another spot. So bottom line, whether you look at the macro level or the micro level, the advantage is to Joe, which would be because the same ascendant moving through his Capricorn region is sextiling these planets, which is perfectly fine. There'll be a moment somewhere near the hour mark or so when the ascendant will oppose Jupiter, which might mean some kind of hyperbole on his part as well. But Biden is much more controlled than the Orange Menace, and so I doubt very much that'll be a problem. So bottom line is that it definitely works out better for him having this ascendant throughout the debate. So in summary, if you're a nervous Democrat, given the high stakes of this situation, a presidential debate in a very, very contentious election, I would rest easy, because my feeling is we're going to see a Joe Biden very similar to the Joe we saw back in the spring at the State of the Union, and that'll be more than good enough to get through this and score some important points in the presidential race. And I would not be surprised one bit if the debate leads to at least a shift, even if it's a small shift, in the numbers that have already started to move in Joe's direction on a national level, as well as in the battleground states, though admittedly it is still very close, and arguably it'll be a close election no matter what, given the dynamics in play at the U.S. in this era. Nevertheless, my feeling is this is yet another step in the right direction.